Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are tackling one of the most puzzling prophecies in the entire Bible. It was a really strange answer to a pretty simple request, and honestly, it's been confusing people for centuries. So, picture this. The religious leaders of the day come up to Jesus and demand that he perform some kind of miracle, a sign to prove who he is. But he won't do it. Instead, he gives them this riddle, an answer that points all the way back to an ancient story about a prophet who really did not want to do his job. He tells them the only proof they're going to get is this sign of Jonah, and then he directly compares his own fate to a guy who was swallowed by a giant fish. It's a bizarre comparison, for sure. So, okay, let's really get into this. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, that's easy. 3 days in the fish, 3 days in the tomb. Case closed. But you know what? If we stop there, we miss the absolute genius of this sign. The key to unlocking it is not what you might think. Because here's the deal. In the ancient world, and especially in the Old Testament, the phrase 3 days wasn't just about telling time. It was a code. It was a powerful literary signal to the reader that something very, very specific was about to go down. The number 3 itself was huge. It often represented a small but totally complete unit of time, a full cycle. It's like the smallest, most compact version of a total experience you can have. And once you start looking for this pattern in the Old Testament, you see it everywhere. It's like a hidden language starts to pop out in story after story. Time and time again, whenever a story mentions a 3-day period, it's basically a giant blinking sign that says, pay attention. It consistently signals one of these 4 crucial moments, a time of transformation, where someone is pushed to their absolute limit right before something new begins. All right, let's look at a few killer examples of this pattern in action. I promise, once you see it, you're not going to be able to unsee it. Think about this. This wasn't just about the walking time. The author specifically points out the 3 days to make us feel the intense, agonizing weight of Abraham's decision. It's a complete cycle of testing before that final, dramatic moment. And here we go again. Right before the huge life-or-death confrontation with the king, the entire story just pauses for 3 days. It's the final prep, the quiet before the storm, setting the stage for the book's great turning point. This one is just so clear, right? It's not just some random day. The 3rd day marks a complete 180. It's the boundary line that's crossed from a death sentence to a promise of life. It is the moment of divine turnaround. In fact, the pattern is so well known that the prophet Hosea uses this exact language to talk about God restoring the entire nation. The 3rd day becomes this shorthand, this code for a whole cycle of trial followed by revival. So let's put it all together. The crucial point is this. When an ancient reader heard the phrase 3 days, alarm bells would go off. It was a massive literary cue that told them to expect a moment where human effort fails, a character hits rock bottom, and only a divine act can change the outcome. Okay, so armed with this key, let's circle all the way back to Jonah. Because now we can see his story isn't just some weird adventure with a fish. It's a perfect textbook example of this ancient literary pattern. I mean, just look at his journey. He disobeys, hits a crisis so bad he'd rather die, and then gets plunged into a 3-day period where he is completely, utterly helpless. It is his ultimate turning point, a symbolic death and rescue. And what's really wild is how Jonah himself describes the experience. He doesn't say, man, it was dark inside that fish. No, he says he cried out from the belly of Sheol, from the grave itself. The text wants us to see this as a descent into actual death. Inside that fish, Jonah had reached the absolute end of his rope. There was nothing he could do to save himself. His 3 days represent a full cycle of hopelessness that ends with a rescue that could only come from God. And that brings us all the way back to Jesus. Understanding this pattern is everything. So why was this the only sign he would give? Because Jesus wasn't just repeating the pattern, he was completing it, fulfilling it and surpassing it in every single way. Jonah's story began with disobedience and, frankly, resentment for his enemies. Jesus' journey was one of perfect obedience, dying for his enemies. For Jonah, that symbolic death was the start of a mission he didn't even want. For Jesus, actual death was the climax of his willing one. And Jesus himself points this out, right after giving the sign. He basically says that what he is doing is so much greater than what Jonah did. He is the reality that the Jonah story was only ever a shadow of. So the ultimate takeaway is this. The sign of Jonah isn't really a prediction about a timeline. It's a profound statement about purpose. It's a sign that Jesus would enter a state of complete helplessness and death, not out of disobedience like Jonah, but out of perfect obedience, and that he would emerge through a divine act of resurrection that would change absolutely everything. When we see it this way, it just transforms Jesus' statement, doesn't it? It goes from being a simple time prediction to being the ultimate climax of this deep, ancient pattern. It's the story of trial, testing, and divine intervention, all brought to its final and most powerful conclusion.